She arrived in the middle of a rainstorm, soaking wet, sitting in a wheelchair, and completely unbothered by either. Daniel Carter opened his front door expecting nobody and found a woman who looked at him like she'd already decided something about his life that he hadn't agreed to yet. She was beautiful in the sharp, deliberate way of someone who'd never had to ask for anything twice. And then she opened her mouth and asked him to father her child. Not donate, father, co-parent, raise a baby with her, a woman he had never met before this exact moment, standing in the rain on his porch at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. Daniel almost laughed. Then he realized she was completely serious. Well, if this story already has your attention, hit that like button and drop a comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The storm had been building since mid-afternoon. Daniel Carter noticed it the way he noticed most things these days, practically, with one eye on the problem and the other on whatever was about to become the next problem. He'd picked Emma up from school at 3:15, made it to the grocery store by 3:40, and had dinner on the table by 5:30. Pasta with the red sauce Emma liked, the one from the jar because he'd run out of the canned tomatoes he used for the homemade version, and he wasn't about to drive back out in weather like this. Emma ate half her bowl, decided she was full, then immediately asked for a cookie. "You're not full," Daniel said. I'm full of pasta. I have cookie room." "That's not how stomachs work." "It's how my stomach works." She was 7 years old and had recently discovered the art of argument. Not the crying kind, she wanted. She'd largely moved past that. This was the worst kind, the kind that made actual logical points delivered with the absolute confidence of someone who had never once been wrong about anything in her entire life. Daniel looked at her. She looked back at him. Her eyes were his, dark brown, borderline serious. But the expression on her face was something she'd built entirely on her own. Stubborn in a way that didn't come from him, and definitely didn't come from her mother, and sometimes made him wonder in quiet moments exactly who this small person actually was. "Finish half the pasta that's still in the bowl," he said. "Then you can have one cookie." "Half of what's left, or half of the original amount?" "Emma, I'm just clarifying the terms. Half of what's left. Eat." She ate. He cleaned up while she finished, scraping the pot, rinsing plates, listening to the rain start to pick up against the kitchen window. The house wasn't big, 3 bedrooms in a quiet neighborhood on the east side of Millfield, the kind of place where people mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings and waved to each other across driveways without necessarily knowing each other's last names. Daniel had bought it 4 years ago when he was still trying to make a life that looked like the one he'd planned, back when there were still 2 of them doing the planning. He didn't think about that often, or he tried not to. Emma got her cookie. He got a cup of coffee he didn't really need but made anyway, and they spent the next hour on the couch, with her reading a book about penguins and him flipping through a folder of invoices from the shop that he'd been meaning to go through since Thursday. The rain got louder. Emma fell asleep around 8:30, which was later than he would have liked, but earlier than he'd been expecting, and he carried her to bed and stood in the doorway for a moment the way he always did, not out of sentimentality exactly, more out of something he couldn't name, some check-in with himself that the day had ended and she was safe, and tomorrow was another one. He went back downstairs, made a second cup of coffee he definitely didn't need, opened a beer instead. The knock came at 10:23. He knew the time because he'd just glanced at the clock on the microwave, wondering if it was too late to call his friend Marcus back about the parts order they'd been arguing over. It was hard to hear the knock over the rain. He almost missed it entirely. But it came again. 3 sharp raps, deliberate, not desperate, and Daniel set down the beer and walked to the front door with the mild, low-level alertness of a man who had learned years ago that nothing good showed up unannounced after 10 o'clock, and that the right response to that was attention rather than panic. He opened the door. The woman in the wheelchair was soaked, not inconveniently damp, soaked, hair plastered flat against her neck, jacket clinging to her shoulders, water running off the footrests of her chair onto his porch in a slow, steady drip. Behind her, a black car sat idling at the curb, its headlights cutting through the rain, and a man in a dark jacket stood beside it with the posture of someone who had been told to wait there and would wait there until told otherwise. None of that was what Daniel noticed first. What he noticed first was her face. She was looking at him with the focused, measuring attention of someone who had been studying a problem for a long time, and had finally arrived at the point where they were ready to act on whatever conclusion they'd reached. Not nervous, not apologetic. There was a file folder in her lap, sealed in a clear plastic cover to protect it from the rain, and her hands, elegant hands, he noticed, the nails short and unpainted, were resting on top of it with a stillness that struck him as deliberately controlled. "Daniel Carter," she said. Not a question. "That's me." He leaned against the doorframe. "Can I help you?" "My name is Isabella Sterling." She said it the way people said names they expected to be recognized, a slight pause after, just enough space for the reaction to fill in. When his face stayed neutral, something flickered across hers. Not embarrassment, more like recalibration. "It's late," Daniel said. "I know. I apologize for the hour." She didn't sound particularly apologetic. "I had some difficulty with the schedule. My assistant tried to reach you through the shop, but I don't take calls at the shop about personal matters." "That's a reasonable policy." She glanced briefly at the rain, then back at him. If the weather bothered her, she wasn't advertising it. "I won't take much of your time. There are some things I'd like to discuss with you. I've prepared some materials." She indicated the folder in her lap. Daniel looked at the folder, then at her, then at the man still standing beside the car in the rain. The man gave no reaction at all. "What kind of materials?" "Documents. A proposal." A pause. "I've been looking for the right person for a particular arrangement, Mr. Carter. It's taken me some time to find someone whose background, values, and circumstances aligned with what I was looking for. You came up in my research." "Your research?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. The rain drummed against the porch overhang. "What kind of arrangement are we talking about?" She looked at him directly. Whatever she wasn't a person who looked away when it mattered. "I want a child," she said, "and I want a co-parent, not a donor, a genuine co-parent, someone involved in the child's life, in the raising of them, in the decisions. I want the child to have a real father." Another pause, shorter this time. "I believe you would be the right person for that role." The silence that followed wasn't the kind where someone was thinking about what to say. It was the kind where the brain had just been handed something it hadn't expected and was running a quick structural integrity check on the last 30 seconds of experience. Daniel straightened up slowly from the doorframe. "I'm sorry," he said, because he genuinely wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. "You want me to—" "What, exactly?" "To father my child, to co-parent, to be present and involved in a real, substantive way." "We've never met." "I know. You just told me your name 30 seconds ago." "I know that too." He stared at her. She looked back at him with that same focused, measuring expression, and he had the strange and not entirely comfortable feeling of being assessed. "No," he said. He said it plainly, without heat, because it seemed like the most accurate response to what had just been asked. Then he stepped back and began to close the door. "I've researched you thoroughly, Mr. Carter." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't sharpen. It stayed exactly where it had been, clear and unhurried. "I know about Emma. I know about your ex-wife, about the shop, about how you've managed the last 4 years. I'm not asking you to make a decision tonight. I'm asking you to read the proposal." Daniel stopped with the door half closed and looked at her through the gap. "You researched me," he said flatly. "Yes." "My daughter." Her situation was relevant to understanding your circumstances. "I wasn't—" "You're done here." He said it quietly, and there wasn't any particular coldness in it, which somehow made it worse than if there had been. "I don't know how you found my address or what you've been looking into, but whatever it is you're looking for, it isn't here. You need to leave." She held his gaze for a moment. Then, to his surprise, she nodded. "All right." She set the folder on the porch railing. "But I'm going to leave this here in case you change your mind." She turned the chair with a practiced efficiency that told him she'd been doing it for a long time and began to move back toward the car. "I won't," Daniel said. She didn't respond to that. He watched her go. The man by the car moving quickly to open the rear door, some kind of mechanism with the vehicle that let her board it, The chair folded and stowed in a matter of seconds that spoke of well-practiced routine. The whole thing took less than a minute. Then the car pulled away from the curb, headlights sweeping through the rain, and the street was quiet and wet and empty again. Daniel stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he looked at the folder on the porch railing. He left it there. He did not sleep well. This was not entirely unusual. His sleep had never fully recovered from the Emma years, the infancy period when he'd been running on 3-hour blocks and black coffee. And even now, with a 7-year-old who slept through the night like a person who had never once experienced anxiety, his own brain still treated 2 in the morning like a reasonable hour to conduct a full review of everything he might be worried about. Tonight, the review included, for the first time, a wet folder on his porch railing. He'd brought it inside around 11:30. Not because he intended to read it, he was clear on that. He brought it inside because leaving it out in the rain felt like some kind of statement he hadn't made up his mind to make yet. He put it on the kitchen counter and went to bed and spent the next 2 hours mostly looking at the ceiling. The problem wasn't that the request was offensive. He'd gotten over offensive fairly quickly. The initial flare of it, the "what the hell does this person think she's doing?" had burned itself out pretty fast because there wasn't much fuel there. He didn't know her. She didn't know him. People did strange things when they wanted something badly enough. The problem was the other thing, the researched you thing, the knowing about Emma thing. He didn't like that at all. He had become, over the past 4 years, a person who was careful about what came near his daughter, not paranoid. He wasn't a man who moved through the world expecting threats, but careful, deliberate. Emma's life had already absorbed one major instability, and he'd spent a long time building a world around her that was steady and predictable, the kind of world where she knew what to expect because the adults in it knew what they were doing. A strange woman doing background research on a 7-year-old for purposes of, what exactly? Recruitment? Was not part of that world. He got up at 6:15. Emma woke up at 7, ate cereal, complained that there was no orange juice, then forgot about it and spent 20 minutes looking for a specific hair elastic before accepting a different one. Daniel drove her to school, dropped her at the front gate, watched her walk inside with the slightly rolling gait she'd had since she was a toddler, something about the way she held her shoulders, and then sat in the car for a minute longer than he needed to. The folder was still on the kitchen counter when he got home. He made coffee and stood in front of it. Don't, he told himself. He read the first page. Isabella Sterling, 30 years old, was the founder and CEO of Sterling Meridian, a company that did something with sustainable infrastructure development. Daniel gathered from context that this was a big deal, the kind of big deal that got you profiled in magazines and invited onto panels and generally treated like someone whose opinions mattered. The bio was factual to the point of austerity. There wasn't a single sentence in it that sounded like she'd written it herself, but there also wasn't a single sentence that seemed exaggerated. Just, here are the facts about this person. Decide what they mean to you. At 27, she'd been in a car accident. The document didn't say much about it, a few lines, clinical, but the result was paraplegia, lower body. She'd been using a wheelchair for 3 years. The proposal was about 40 pages, which was a lot. It covered, in exhaustive detail, financial arrangements, custody logistics, co-parenting frameworks, legal agreements, the theoretical education philosophy she had for a child she didn't yet have, her views on discipline, her views on healthcare, her views on what a child needed from the adults in their life. It was the most organized thing Daniel had ever read. It was also, underneath all the organization, quietly heartbreaking in a way she probably didn't know and definitely hadn't intended. He set it down after page 20. Watkins Auto and Repair occupied a converted warehouse space on Greenfield Avenue that Daniel had been leasing for 6 years, first as an apprentice under the previous owner, then, after a combination of hard saving and a loan he'd spent 3 years paying back, as his own. He employed 3 people. His head mechanic Sal, who was 54 years old, had opinions about everything and was better at his job than Daniel was and knew it. A younger mechanic named Ray, who was 23 and still learning but showed up on time every day and didn't complain. And Donna, who managed the front desk and the scheduling and approximately 80% of the decisions that kept the place running smoothly. Daniel arrived at 8:30, 20 minutes later than usual, and Sal looked at him over the hood of a Volvo he was inspecting. "You look like you didn't sleep." "Good morning to you too." Ray called in with a thing. I don't know what kind of thing. He sounded like he might be lying. Is the Volvo done? I've got 2 more hours on it, maybe. Donna's got questions about the Hewitt account. I'll talk to her. He spent the morning doing the ordinary work of the shop. The calls, the scheduling, a problem with a transmission that turned out to be simpler than it first appeared, a disagreement with a supplier about a parts delay that wasn't getting resolved over email. So Daniel called them and resolved it on the phone in about 8 minutes. This was most of what running the business actually was. Not the mechanical work, though he still did that, still liked doing it, liked the concreteness of a problem with a clear answer. It was mostly the other stuff, the staying on top of things. He thought about Isabella Sterling twice during the morning and told himself to stop both times. Around 1 o'clock, Sal found him in the back office eating a sandwich. Marcus called, said he's still waiting on an answer about those parts. I know. I'll call him this afternoon. Sal leaned in the doorway and looked at him in the way he had. The particular Sal look that meant he'd noticed something and was deciding whether it was worth getting involved in. Sal had a theory that most problems people had were caused by overthinking, and that the cure for overthinking was to either talk about the problem or stop thinking about it, and that the choice between those 2 options should be made quickly. Something on your mind? Sal asked. No. Sal considered this. All right. He didn't move. There was a woman at my door last night, Daniel said, because apparently he was going to talk about it. Showed up in the rain, a stranger. She had this whole... He shook his head. It doesn't matter. It was strange. Strange how? She wanted me to co-parent a child with her. We'd never met. Sal blinked. She wanted you to what? She had a folder, a proposal, 40 pages. 40 pages. Of logistics. She'd done research on me, on Emma. He paused. She knew things about my life that she shouldn't have known if I was actually a stranger. Sal was quiet for a moment. Is she dangerous? No, I don't think so. She seemed like someone who was very used to getting things done through research and planning and money. Not dangerous, just, he searched for the word, disconcerting. What did you tell her? No, I closed the door. Good. Sal straightened up. You want my advice? Not really. If she comes back, call the police. You've got Emma to think about. I know. And stop reading whatever she gave you. Daniel looked up. What makes you think I read it? Sal looked at him with the flat patience of someone who had known him for 6 years. Because you read everything, he said, and walked back out to the shop. Emma had a playdate after school on Wednesdays with a girl named Sophie, whose mother Janet was one of the very few people Daniel had what you might call a social friendship with, meaning they occasionally talked about things that weren't logistics. He picked Emma up from Janet's at 5:30, and Emma spent the entire drive home explaining the rules of a game that she and Sophie had invented, the complexity of which rivaled most board games Daniel had ever encountered. And if you land on a yellow square, you have to give up one of your coins, but only if it's a Tuesday coin, not a Wednesday coin, because what's a Tuesday coin? A coin you collected on Tuesday. How do you know which coins you collected on which day? She stared at him like he'd said something deeply, fundamentally wrong. You remember, Dad? Right. Were you even listening? Yellow squares, Tuesday coins. I'm with you. She gave him the look that meant she wasn't entirely convinced but was willing to extend provisional trust, and went back to the rules. Daniel drove and listened and felt the particular sensation he often felt in these moments, which was something between gratitude and a low, persistent anxiety he'd stopped trying to name. She was everything. She was completely fine, and she was completely terrifying in her fineness, in how much she mattered to him, in what it had taken to get the two of them to this place. A Wednesday evening in October, pasta or something from the fridge for dinner, a game with Tuesday coins, the rain from last night dried off the streets. He did not want anyone coming near this. He tried to return the folder to her. This turned out to be harder than it should have been. He'd found a business card tucked inside the front cover. Sterling Meridian, an address downtown, a phone number. He called the number Thursday morning and got a receptionist who was extremely pleasant and confirmed that yes, Ms. Sterling's office was at this address. And could she ask who was calling? Daniel Carter. A brief pause. Of course, Mr. Carter. Would you like to leave a message or... I'd like to speak to her directly. Ms. Sterling's schedule is... Tell her Daniel Carter called. I have something that belongs to her, and I'd like to return it. He paused. I'd appreciate it if she didn't send anyone to my house again. Another pause. I'll pass that along, Mr. Carter. She didn't call back. On Friday morning, he found a single white envelope in his mailbox. No stamp, which meant it had been hand-delivered. Inside was a card, the heavy cream stock of someone who ordered business supplies in bulk and expected quality. And on it, in handwriting that was angular and precise, returning it suggests you read it. I hope you found the proposal reasonable, if nothing else. Izzy read it 3 times. Then he put it in the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus and the batteries and the random collection of small things that accumulated in kitchen drawers over years of living somewhere. He saw her for the second time on Saturday afternoon. He was at the farmer's market on Clement Street with Emma, which was a thing they did most Saturdays when the weather was okay. Emma liked the bread stand and the man who made hot cider and a particular table of handmade wooden toys she always looked at for a long time and occasionally talked him into. Daniel liked it because it was predictable and calm, and the vendor with the hot sauce always had something new worth trying. He was standing at the vegetable stall, holding a bunch of kale. He wasn't entirely sure he'd know what to do with when he felt the particular prickling of being watched. He turned. She was on the far side of the market, beside the bread stand, the one Emma liked. In a dark coat, her hair down today, one hand resting on the wheel of her chair, and the other holding a paper cup of something warm. She wasn't pretending not to see him. She was looking directly at him, and when he turned and their eyes met, she didn't look away. She gave a very small, controlled nod. He stared at her for a moment. Emma appeared at his elbow, clutching a small wooden figure of a fox. Dad, can I... She noticed his expression. What are you looking at? Nothing. He bought the kale mostly to have something to do with his hands. We're almost done. Can I have the fox? It's $12. I'll be really good for 2 whole weeks. You're already pretty good. I'll be better. He bought the fox. He didn't look back across the market again, but when they passed the bread stand on the way out, he couldn't help it. He glanced over. She was gone. Emma was examining her fox. This is Gerald, she said. Gerald. He looks like a Gerald. Daniel looked at the empty spot where Isabella Sterling had been standing and then looked back at his daughter and said, Yeah, he kind of does. Well, on Monday he got a call from Emma's school. It wasn't an emergency call, not the kind that made his stomach drop, but it was the kind that used that particular tone of voice, careful, professional, delivering information while managing anticipated reactions. The school counselor, a woman named Mrs. Hewitt, told him that a representative from an organization called the Meridian Education Foundation had reached out to the school last week about a scholarship program for students in the district. They had flagged Emma, along with 2 other students, as candidates based on academic performance and a set of criteria she read aloud from a document that sounded like it had been written by a lawyer. I wanted to talk with you before we responded, Mrs. Hewitt said, because the foundation asked us not to reach out to parents yet while they completed their assessment. I wasn't comfortable with that. Daniel's jaw had tightened somewhere around the word meridian and hadn't loosened since. Who contacted you? A woman. She said her name was... The rustling of paper. Ms. Park, from the foundation's outreach department. And this foundation. You'd heard of them before? No, I hadn't. I did look them up. They appear to be a legitimate organization, founded 3 years ago, focused on STEM education initiatives. Who founded it? A pause. The documentation listed the founder as I. Sterling. The silence on the line stretched out long enough that Mrs. Hewitt said, Mr. Carter, are you still there? I'm here. He was standing in the back office of the shop with his hand so tight around the phone that his knuckles were white. Tell them Emma's not a candidate. Tell them you're not interested in the program. And thank you for calling me before you responded. Of course. I thought you should know. I really appreciate it. He hung up. He sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then he pulled out the business card from his wallet, the one he'd kept, though he hadn't acknowledged to himself that he'd kept it, and called the number. And this time, when the receptionist answered and said, "Sterling Meridian, how can I help you?" he said, "I need to speak to Miss Sterling. My name is Daniel Carter. She'll know who I am." 30 seconds of hold music. Then, "Mr. Carter." Her voice was the same as the rain-soaked porch, even, measured, not offering anything it wasn't choosing to offer. "What do you think you're doing?" he said. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." Meridian Education Foundation. Emma's school. A pause. "I was made aware that the foundation had been doing outreach in that district. Your foundation, that you founded, reaching out to my daughter's school about my daughter. Emma is academically..." "Stop." He said it flatly, and the word landed hard enough that she did stop. "I told you no. I told you to leave us alone. And instead you went around me and directly into Emma's life. That's not how this works. That's not how anything works. I wasn't trying to, but I'm not interested in what you were trying to do. I'm telling you what you did." He exhaled. "I need to say this to you in person, because apparently phone calls aren't getting through. I'll come to your office." Another pause, longer this time. "All right," she said. Sterling Meridian occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower on Whitmore Street, the kind of building that said we take ourselves seriously without needing to say anything at all. The lobby had the hushed, climate-controlled quality of places that spent a lot of money on their climate control. The receptionist told him Ms. Sterling would see him in a moment and offered him water, which he declined, and then he sat in a chair designed to make people feel comfortable and looked at the art on the walls, which was the sort of abstract that said nothing about the person who chose it. She came out herself, which he hadn't expected. He'd assumed an assistant, a conference room, the machinery of corporate formality. Instead, she came through the glass door that separated the lobby from the offices and stopped a few feet from him. She was in different clothes than either time he'd seen her before. A dark blazer over a white shirt, professional and precise. Her hair was pulled back. She looked in the daylight of her own building, entirely in command of herself and everything around her. She looked at him and waited. "Let's talk," he said. She led him to a conference room that looked out over the city. Glass walls on 2 sides, the kind of view that reminded you how high up you were. She moved through the space the way she moved through everything, with a directness that was neither performative nor apologetic. She positioned herself at the end of the table, and Daniel sat across from her, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "I wasn't trying to go around you," she said. "And yet, the foundation operates independently of my... Isabella." He said her name deliberately, watched something shift slightly in her face. "I don't care about the structure. You were aware of it. You knew they were contacting her school. Maybe you didn't call it directly, but you knew." She held his gaze. "Yes." The honesty surprised him. He'd expected more corporate architecture, more technically accurate non-admissions. Instead, she just said it. "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. The city sat behind the glass in the late afternoon light, all that distance below them. "Because I was trying to find a way in," she said. "I realize that's not a defense, but it's the honest answer. A way in. You closed the door. I understood why. She stopped. "I wanted to find a way to be useful. To Emma, specifically. And I did it without asking you, which was..." She paused again, and he had the sense of someone choosing words with more care than usual. Someone used to language being a tool for precision, finding it inadequate. "I handled it poorly." Daniel sat with that. "She's not a pathway," he said. "She's not leverage, and she's not a project. She's a 7-year-old kid who has had enough instability in her life, and she doesn't need another adult with an agenda moving through it." "I understand." "Do you?" "I think so." A pause. "I think you're telling me that any involvement has to go through you, not around you." "That's part of it." She looked at him steadily. "What's the rest?" He leaned back in his chair. Outside, the city was getting its first wash of evening light. He thought about the folder on his counter. The proposal with its 40 pages of logistics, and underneath them, if you were paying attention, something lonelier and more honest than any of the logistics. "I don't know yet," he said. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't the same no it had been on Tuesday night, in the rain, and they both felt the difference. He stood to leave. She stayed where she was, and he had the same impression he had had on the porch, of someone who was very good at holding still when they needed to. Someone who had learned at some point that stillness could be a form of control. At the door he stopped. "Next time you want to do something," he said, "ask me first." She looked at him. "I'll consider it," she said, and there was something in her voice, not warmth exactly, but the edge of something that hadn't been there in the rain, and he nodded once and walked out through the lobby and back into the ordinary air of the street below. He sat in his car for a few minutes before he started the engine. He thought about Gerald the fox, currently residing on Emma's nightstand. He thought about the way Isabella Sterling had said yes when she could have kept deflecting. He thought about 40 pages of logistics written by someone who had thought very hard about what a child needed and had not, apparently thought very hard about how to be a person in relation to one. He started the car. He had to get home. Emma would need dinner, and he was pretty sure they were out of pasta, and tomorrow was a school day, and she'd need a bath, and someone would need to check if the Friday coin was different from the Saturday coin, or if the rule only applied on weekdays. He had a lot of things to figure out. But he drove home thinking, without entirely meaning to, about someone who had built a 40-page plan for a life she didn't know how to ask for. He hadn't told Emma about any of it. This was a choice he'd made consciously, then second-guessed twice, then made again. Emma was 7, which meant she was old enough to notice things and young enough to make meaning out of them in ways he couldn't always predict or correct. She'd already logged Isabella Sterling somewhere in her memory, the woman at the bread stand, the one Dad had been staring at. And Emma had a habit of returning to things she'd logged, sometimes weeks later, out of nowhere. The way she'd once asked him on a random Tuesday morning why dogs didn't have last names. If and when Isabella came up again, he'd deal with it then. He just hadn't expected when to come so fast. It was Thursday, 11 days after the conference room, and Daniel was picking Emma up from school when she came through the gate with Sophie and said, loud enough for 3 other parents to hear, "Dad, is the lady in the wheelchair your friend?" He looked at her. "What lady?" "The one from the market, with the dark coat." Emma's face was doing the thing where it was entirely neutral, which meant she was paying close attention to his reaction. "She was here today, at the gate. She was talking to Mrs. Patterson." Mrs. Patterson was the school's vice principal. Daniel crouched down to Emma's level, which was something he did when he needed her full attention without making a scene. "What did she look like?" "I already told you. Dark coat, wheelchair." Emma tilted her head. "She had really good posture. For someone in a wheelchair, I mean." "Did she talk to you?" "No, she saw me looking at her and she smiled a little and then she looked away." A pause. "She looked kind of sad." He stood up. He said goodbye to Sophie's mother, who was giving him the politely curious look of a woman who had heard the wheelchair comment and was too well-mannered to ask. He got Emma into the car, drove half a block, and then pulled over and took out his phone. She picked up on the second ring. "You were at Emma's school again." A brief pause. "I was meeting with Mrs. Patterson about the district arts funding initiative. It's a separate program from Isabella." Silence. "My office had scheduled that meeting 6 weeks ago," she said. "Before I ever came to your house. I didn't—" She stopped. "I know how it looks." "How does it look?" Another pause, and he could hear in it the sound of someone choosing not to say something defensive. "Like, I'm not listening to you." "Are you?" "I'm trying to." She said it without self-pity, which he appreciated. "I moved the meeting from my assistant to in-person because the funding discussion required some additional documentation. I didn't think about the school pickup time. I should have thought about it." He watched a car go by. In the back seat, Emma had taken Gerald the fox out of her backpack and was examining him with the focused attention she gave, things she was currently thinking hard about. "She said you looked sad," Daniel said. A long pause. "I might have been having a difficult morning," Isabella said. He didn't push that. Instead, he said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "All right." Are you capable of doing this differently? Because what I'm hearing is you know the right things to say. Ask first, go through me, not around me. But when the moment comes, something else takes over and you go back to what you know. He wasn't saying it to be cruel. He was saying it because it seemed true and because he'd spent 4 years making decisions based on what was real rather than what he hoped. I need to know if that's a pattern or an exception. The silence this time was different from the others. It was the silence of someone who had been asked something they'd been asking themselves. I think, she said slowly, it might be a pattern. He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Okay. That's not... I'm telling you that because you asked for honesty, not because I've given up on changing it. I know. He watched Emma in the rearview mirror. She was now having a quiet conversation with Gerald, moving the fox's legs in a way that suggested he was walking across her knee. Come to dinner on Saturday. The pause that followed was the most surprised one yet. I'm sorry? Dinner. Saturday night. My house. Nothing formal. We eat around 6. It's usually whatever Emma decides she wants, which lately has been either tacos or spaghetti. You can meet her properly. Not at a school gate, not at a farmer's market. At a table. He paused. But you come to the door, you ring the bell, and we talk for 5 minutes before Emma's involved. Those are my terms. She stopped, started again. Yes, all right. And no folders. A beat. No folders. He hung up and looked at the mirror again. Emma had stopped walking Gerald across her knee and was looking out the window at nothing in particular. Dad, she said. Yeah. Is she coming to dinner? He turned around to face her. She looked back at him with those serious dark eyes. How much of that did you hear? Not much. I wasn't trying to. A pause that he recognized as the Emma pause, the one that meant she was negotiating internally whether to say the thing she was thinking. I heard dinner and Saturday. She's coming to dinner Saturday. Emma looked at Gerald. Does she like tacos? I don't know. We should make tacos, Emma said with a finality that closed the topic, and Daniel turned back around and pulled back onto the street. Okay, he told Sal the next day, not because he'd planned to, but because Sal asked how things were with the wheelchair woman situation. Sal had not updated his terminology. And Daniel found himself explaining Saturday dinner, and Sal's expression went through several stages, the last of which settled into something between concern and reluctant curiosity. You're having her over, Sal said. Yes. The woman who researched your family and showed up in the rain at 10:30 at night. When you say it like that, I'm saying it accurately. Daniel stopped. He'd been about to say not a bad person, which was true, but didn't cover it, and then he'd been about to say complicated, which was also true, but was what people said when they didn't know what else to say. She's someone who's used to solving problems by controlling variables, and she's been doing it wrong with me, and she knows it, and I think she's actually trying to do it differently, which is harder than it sounds for someone like her. Sal looked at him for a moment. You read the whole folder, didn't you? Yes, all 40 pages. It was a thorough document. Sal made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Be careful, Daniel. I'm always careful. You're careful about your kid and about the business. With people, he picked up a wrench he didn't seem to need. You're careful in a different way. You keep the door mostly closed, and then every once in a while you open it all the way, and you don't always check the weather first. Daniel thought about that. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying be careful. Sal pointed the wrench at him briefly. And make sure Emma has a good time Saturday, whatever else happens. Saturday came with the low, colorless sky of mid-autumn, not threatening rain, but not promising anything pleasant either. Daniel made a grocery run in the morning, Tacos confirmed, and spent more time than he'd admit to thinking about whether the house looked like something a person had actually lived in versus something that needed straightening before company. He straightened the living room, then looked at what he'd done and moved the stack of Emma's library books back to where they'd been, because the straightened version looked like a set, and the messy version looked like people actually lived there. Emma helped in the kitchen in the sense that she cut half a tomato successfully, dropped the other half on the floor, and ate several pinches of shredded cheese while asserting that she was quality testing. You're just eating the cheese. I'm also quality testing. She considered this. It passes. Incredible. What would I do without you? She grinned at him, a full, unself-conscious grin that she'd had since she was a toddler, the kind that took over her whole face and went back to the tomato. The doorbell rang at 5:58, 2 minutes early, which was either accident or deliberate. Daniel put down the dish towel and went to the door and opened it, and Isabella was there in the porch light, a different coat than the rain night, charcoal gray, and she'd left her hair down, which made her look less like someone in the middle of a business meeting and slightly more like a person. She was holding a small paper bag from the bakery on Clement Street. I wasn't sure about wine, she said. I wasn't sure if you... with Emma there, so I brought these. She extended the bag. They're croissants for tomorrow morning. I realize it might be presumptuous. A very brief pause where something almost like discomfort moved through her eyes. I wasn't sure what to bring. He took the bag. Croissants are good. She likes croissants. He stepped back from the door. Come in. He'd wondered how she'd navigate the house. The front step had a small lip on it. The doorway was fine, but the turn to the living room was tighter than he'd noticed before he started noticing things like that. She managed all of it with a competence that suggested she'd learned to read spaces quickly and had long since stopped expecting them to accommodate her. He watched her do it without watching, meaning he didn't stare and didn't make a thing of it, but he paid attention, the way you paid attention to anything that mattered. She stopped in the living room doorway and looked around at it. The library books he'd moved back, the throw on the couch that Emma had rearranged approximately 4 times in the past week, the small collection of things on the windowsill that accumulated in houses where a child lived, a rock Emma had found, the wooden penguin from a birthday party, a twist of colored wire she'd made at school. It looks like people live here, Isabella said. She said it like she meant it as a compliment, and like she knew it revealed something, and had decided to say it anyway. Generally, that's the goal. Emma appeared from the hallway, still in the socks she'd been wearing all afternoon, one of which had a hole in the toe she'd been ignoring. She stopped when she saw Isabella and stood there for a moment doing her assessment thing. I'm Emma, she said. I know, I'm Isabella. She said it evenly, not overperforming warmth. Your father's told me a little about you. He told me about you too. Emma came a few steps further into the room, looking at the wheelchair with the frank scientific interest of a child who had no social reason to pretend it wasn't there. Does it hurt? Emma, Daniel started. It's all right. Isabella looked at Emma directly, adult to child, which Emma responded to. She had little patience for being talked down to. No, it doesn't hurt. I can't feel my legs, so there's nothing to hurt. Oh, Emma processed this. So it's like they're asleep? Like when your foot falls asleep? In a way. Except they're not going to wake up. Emma nodded, filing it. Do you want to see Gerald? She asked. Daniel had not anticipated this question. Isabella looked briefly at him, then back at Emma. Who is Gerald? My fox. She was already heading back down the hallway. I'll get him. He lives on my nightstand because I have a nightstand and he doesn't. Then she was gone, and it was just the two of them in the living room, and the kitchen smelled like the spiced beef, and Daniel became suddenly absurdly aware of how small the house was. Not in a bad way, just in the way of someone who had mostly dealt with Isabella Sterling in formal settings, and was now experiencing the cognitive adjustment of having her in his actual living room. She's very direct, Isabella said. Yeah. He paused. I keep waiting to decide if that's my influence or just her. Probably both. Probably. He turned back toward the kitchen. You want something to drink? We have juice, water. I think there's some sparkling water in the back of the fridge from like 3 months ago. Water is fine. Come in the kitchen if you want. You don't have to wait in there. She followed him to the kitchen and positioned herself at the end of the island, out of the way of the space he was working in, but close enough to talk. He got 2 glasses of water and went back to the taco assembly, and she watched him work without filling the silence with anything, which he found, unexpectedly, not uncomfortable. Did you grow up cooking? She asked after a moment. Sort of. My mom worked nights when I was a kid, so I'd make dinner for me and my brother a few nights a week. Nothing complicated, pasta, eggs, whatever was there. How old were you? Started around 10, 11 maybe. He stirred the beef. You? She was quiet for a beat that told him the answer before she gave it. I had a housekeeper. My parents weren't. Another beat. They were busy people. My mother was on the board of 3 different companies. My father ran his own firm. They were excellent at providing things and not particularly present. Is that why the folder had a whole section on parental presence? She looked at him steadily. You noticed that. It was thorough. Yes, she said. That's probably why. Emma came back with Gerald at high speed, nearly sliding on the hallway floor in her holey socks, and arrived at the kitchen island slightly out of breath, holding up the fox. This is Gerald, she announced. He's a red fox, Vulpes vulpes, which is a real Latin name. Dad looked it up. He's named Gerald because he looks like a Gerald. Isabella took Gerald when he was extended toward her, held him in both hands, turned him once. I see what you mean, she said. He does look like a Gerald. I knew you'd get it, Emma said, deeply satisfied, and climbed onto the stool at the island and started eating a pinch of cheese. She's been doing that for an hour, Daniel said. Quality testing, Emma said, without looking up. Dinner was uneven in the way dinners with a 7-year-old tended to be. Emma's taco fell apart on the first bite, and she spent a few minutes upset about this before reconstructing it into a fork situation that she declared better than the original. Daniel spilled salsa on his sleeve. Isabella's first taco held together, but she ate it in a way that suggested she was concentrating on the structural integrity throughout. None of it was graceful. All of it was fine. Emma talked through most of it. The rules of the coin game. A book about wolves she was reading. A classmate named Jordan who had declared, apparently at some volume, that foxes were not as smart as dogs, which Emma had contested on grounds she explained in detail. Isabella listened. Not performatively, not the exaggerated listening of an adult tolerating a child's monologue, but actually listened, asking questions that showed she'd tracked the thread. When Emma explained her argument about fox intelligence, Isabella said, There's research that suggests foxes adapt faster to new environments than dogs. You could look that up. Emma looked at her. Is that real? It's real. Emma turned to Daniel. I need to tell Jordan. I know, Daniel said. Tomorrow. It's Sunday tomorrow. Monday then? She picked up her fork. First thing. After dinner, Emma asked if Isabella could read her a book, which Daniel had not anticipated and which landed on both adults with a brief, charged silence. He looked at Emma, trying to read whether it was a genuine request or a test of some kind. With Emma, it was sometimes hard to tell, and her face was entirely earnest. That's up to Isabella, he said. Isabella set down her glass and looked at Emma. What book? Emma was already sliding off her stool. Daniel cleaned up the kitchen and listened to Emma's voice from the living room explaining the Penguin book. Then Isabella's voice asking something, then Emma's voice again, and he realized after about 3 minutes that the reading had actually started. He could hear it now, Isabella's voice moving through the words in a way that was not the dramatic performance adults sometimes put on for kids, but something quieter and more genuine, and Emma wasn't interrupting, which was either a sign she was tired or a sign she was paying close attention, and he honestly wasn't sure which. He dried the last dish and stood in the kitchen listening. He wasn't sure how long it went. Long enough that when he came to the doorway, Emma was curled sideways in the big chair with Gerald against her chest, and Isabella had positioned herself close enough to share the book, and they were 3 pages from the end. He stood there and didn't say anything. Isabella finished the book. Emma asked one question about the last page that wasn't really a question so much as a statement she wanted confirmed, and Isabella confirmed it. Then Emma said she wasn't tired yet, which Daniel received with the experience of knowing it meant she was actually tired, and he told her to go brush her teeth and he'd be up in a minute. Emma slid out of the chair. At the doorway, she stopped and looked back at Isabella. You can come back, she said, in the same tone she used to announce most things. Declarative, certain, not especially seeking input. Then she went upstairs. The living room held the particular quiet that a room held right after a child left it. She doesn't say that to everyone, Daniel said. I didn't assume she did. He came in and sat on the couch. Isabella had moved to the center of the room, not positioned near the exit, which meant she wasn't ready to leave. He noticed that and said nothing about it. "You're good with her," he said. "I didn't do much." You listened to her argue about foxes for 20 minutes and asked the follow-up question that made her feel like she'd won. That's doing quite a bit. He paused. She doesn't let people in easily. Her mother leaving. She was 3. She doesn't have the memory of it the way I do, but she has the shape of it. Kids carry that even when they can't name it. Isabella was quiet. I'm not telling you that to make you feel sorry for her. She's fine. She's more than fine. He ran a hand along the back of the couch. I'm telling you so you understand what you'd be walking into if this, whatever this is, continues. What would I be walking into? A kid who's learned to be careful about who she trusts, and who, for reasons I don't fully understand yet, seems to have decided to trust you. And that's not nothing. That's not something you can give back if you change your mind. Isabella held his gaze. In the lamplight of the living room, she looked less like the woman from the conference room and more like what he suspected she actually was. Someone who had built a great deal of structure around a person who was still, underneath it, uncertain and trying. I know, she said. And then, I don't intend to change my mind. He thought about asking what that meant exactly, what she meant by intend, what her idea of mind changing looked like. He thought about the folder and the school and the farmer's market and the way she'd said, I think it might be a pattern on the phone, with a kind of bare honesty that he hadn't expected from someone who seemed to have spent most of her life keeping honesty professionally managed. He thought about Sal's comment. You open the door all the way and don't always check the weather first. Okay, he said instead. She left around 9, after turning down the offer of the sparkling water that had been in the back of the fridge since July. He walked her to the door and watched the car pull up from wherever it had been waiting. She had a driver. Of course she did. This was apparently just her life, and watched her board it with the same practiced efficiency as before. At the curb, before the door closed, she looked back at the house. He was still standing in the doorway, and she saw him there, and she held his gaze for one moment that lasted slightly longer than it needed to. Then the door closed, and the car moved down the quiet street, and Daniel stood there until the taillights disappeared around the corner, and then he went inside to check on Emma. She was asleep with Gerald tucked under one arm, and the expression she had in sleep that always made her look younger than she was. He stood in the doorway for the usual moment, checked the usual things, turned off the hallway light. He didn't fall asleep quickly, but for different reasons than the last time. 3 weeks after the Saturday dinner, Isabella had been to the house 4 more times. Not every visit was planned. That was the thing Daniel hadn't anticipated. The way her presence had started to accumulate in small, almost accidental increments rather than the formal, scheduled appointments her personality suggested she'd prefer. The first return visit had been a Sunday afternoon when she called to ask if Emma's claim about foxes outrunning dogs over short distances was actually accurate, because she'd looked it up and found conflicting sources, and Emma had apparently texted her. Emma had gotten Daniel's old phone for games and had, at some point Daniel hadn't noticed, acquired Isabella's number, and Isabella wanted to give her the right answer. Daniel had said she could come by and they could look it up together. It was a sentence he had said without thinking and regretted slightly about 2 seconds later, then didn't regret at all when she arrived, and Emma had spread 3 different library books across the living room floor in preparation and greeted Isabella with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting on a research partner. They'd spent an hour on the floor, Isabella on the floor being a thing he hadn't expected, the wheelchair set aside with a matter-of-factness that clearly cost her nothing, with Emma explaining the books and Isabella reading the relevant passages, and Daniel making coffee in the kitchen and pretending he wasn't listening to all of it. The fox, for the record, did not reliably outrun a dog over short distances. Emma accepted this with the dignity of someone who knew how to lose an argument gracefully, then immediately pivoted to a new claim about fox memory that she said she needed more time to research. The other visits had their own textures. An afternoon where Isabella had brought some work and sat at the kitchen table while Emma did homework and Daniel fixed a leak under the sink, and it had been ordinary in a way that didn't feel ordinary at all. An evening that started as dropping something off and became dinner almost without anyone deciding that's what it was. A Saturday morning with the croissants she'd started bringing, the good ones from Clement Street, and Emma had declared them the best croissants she'd ever had, and Isabella had said they were from a specific bakery, and Emma had said she wanted to go there, and Isabella had said maybe sometime without looking at Daniel to check if that was okay, and Daniel had noticed that and filed it. He'd been filing a lot of things. Isabella was different with Emma than she was anywhere else. It wasn't a performance. He'd watched her carefully enough by now to know the difference between her professional self and whatever this was, but it was an adjustment, like someone who'd been playing an instrument one way their whole life and had recently learned there was another way and was trying to remember it while they played. She still defaulted to information over emotion. She still asked questions like a person assembling a case file, but she listened genuinely, and Emma had decided somewhere along the way that this was sufficient and possibly better than the alternative, and it opened up to her with a speed and ease that both moved Daniel and made him cautious, in the specific way he was cautious when things went better than he'd expected. He'd told Sal about the dinner and the subsequent visits. Sal had listened with the expression of someone who was forming a strong opinion he'd decided not to share until asked. Daniel had made the mistake of asking. "You like her?" Sal said. "I'm getting to know her." That's what people say when the answer is yes, and they're not ready to say yes. He'd picked up a rag he didn't need. "Does she like you?" "I don't know." "Does she act like she likes you?" Daniel had thought about the Saturday morning with the croissants and the way she'd looked at him when Emma wasn't watching, the particular quality of that attention. Specific and not entirely professional. "Maybe," he said. "Right." Sal had walked away with the rag. "Be careful." The problem with be careful as advice was that it didn't specify what to be careful about, which meant the whole world became a potential hazard, and you ended up either paralyzed or ignoring it entirely. Daniel was trying to find something between those two positions with mixed success. The thing that broke everything open happened on a Tuesday. He'd had a full day at the shop. 2 difficult jobs, a parts delivery that came in wrong and had to be sent back, a noise complaint from the neighbor 2 doors down about what he'd called excessive mechanical sounds during residential hours, which Sal had dealt with while Daniel was on the phone, and which Sal had handled with the patient professionalism of a man who had not in fact said everything he could have said. By the time Daniel picked Emma up at 3:15, he was tired in the low-grade, diffuse way that had more to do with accumulated small frustrations than any one thing. Emma was quiet in the car, which was not usual. He gave it a few minutes, then, "How was school?" "Fine." "Just fine?" She was looking out the window. "We had an assembly." "What kind of assembly?" A pause. "About the new arts program. Ms. Delgado talked about it. She said some kids are going to get to take extra classes. Music and painting and stuff after school." Something in Daniel's chest went very still. "What arts program?" he said carefully. "The one Miss Delgado was talking about." Emma turned from the window. "She said it was funded by a foundation. She said some students were selected and their parents would get letters." A pause. "She said my name in the assembly." Daniel pulled over. He didn't do it dramatically. He signaled, found a gap, pulled to the curb in front of a dry cleaner's. He put the car in park and sat there for a moment with his hands on the wheel. "Your name," he said, "in front of everybody." Emma was watching him with the particular attention she gave situations where she wasn't sure how the adult in front of her was going to respond. "Is that bad?" "No." He said it automatically because making Emma feel like she'd done something wrong was not going to happen. "No, that's not bad. That's not your fault at all." He reached back and squeezed her knee briefly. "I just need to make a call when we get home, okay? Can you give me 10 minutes when we get inside?" "Is it about the program?" "Yeah." "Is the program bad?" "I don't know yet." He put the car back in drive. "But I'm going to find out." He called her from the kitchen with the door pulled mostly shut, and Emma in the living room with a snack and the TV on, which was not a Tuesday afternoon routine, but which he decided was allowable given the circumstances. She picked up on the first ring. "Emma's school held an assembly today," he said. "About an arts program. They announced names. Emma's name." a silence that told him she already knew. "Tell me you didn't do this," he said. "Tell me this is another thing that was in motion before, another scheduling situation, and you just didn't think to mention it." "Daniel, because if you tell me that, I will try to believe you, and I will be angry about it, but I'll work through it. But I need you to tell me that." "I can't tell you that." Her voice was quiet, controlled, more controlled than usual, which meant something was being held back. I did put Emma's name forward, a few weeks ago, before Saturday actually, before the dinner. "I thought—" She stopped. "What did you think?" "I thought it was a way to contribute something without it being personal, without crossing the line you'd set." Another pause. "I thought arts education it's not an intrusion, it's an opportunity." It's Emma standing up in front of her class with her name called out as part of something I didn't know about and didn't consent to. His voice was even, which took effort. It's Emma coming home and telling me about it in the car because she didn't know if she was in trouble. That's what it is. "I understand. I don't think you do." There it was. The thing he'd been managing for weeks, the file he'd kept in the back of his mind marked, "Not yet, not yet, opening." "I've tried to be fair with you. I've tried to understand where this comes from, what you're working with, why you do what you do. And I'm not walking that back. I think I do understand it. I think I understand it better than you think I do. But understanding why someone does something doesn't make the thing okay. It just explains it. Daniel, she is not a problem you get to solve." His voice cracked on the last word, just barely, and he stopped and let the moment settle. "She is not a variable in your plan. She's not a subject in your foundation's outreach portfolio. She's my daughter, and she has been through things that I have spent 4 years trying to cushion her from, and you walked right through all of that like it wasn't there because you decided, on your own, with no input from me, that what you were offering was worth more than what it cost." The silence on the line was different from any other silence she'd given him. He couldn't place it exactly, couldn't see her face, but there was something in it that wasn't the usual controlled pause. "You're right," she said. He exhaled. "I know you're right," she continued, and her voice had changed, still quiet, but the control was off in some way, the way a well-made machine sounds when something inside it isn't running the way it should. "I knew it when I did it, and I did it anyway. Because She stopped. "Because I'm very good at deciding that what I think is best is what's best. I have been my entire career, and it works. Except that's not what this is, and I keep—" Her voice hitched almost imperceptibly. "I keep forgetting that it's not what this is." He stood in the kitchen and didn't say anything. "I will call the school," she said. "I will have Emma's name removed from the program before anyone contacts you with letters. It will be done today." A breath. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I mean that completely." "I know you do." He leaned against the counter. "I need you to come here." A pause. "Tonight?" "I need to say the rest of this to your face, not over the phone." "All right. 2 hours?" 2 hours. Emma had gone to bed by 8. Daniel had told her that Isabella was coming by, and she'd received this with slightly narrowed eyes. She'd understood something had happened without knowing what. And she'd asked one question, which was, "Is she in trouble?" And Daniel had said, "Not exactly." And Emma had said, "Okay," with the pragmatic acceptance of a kid who'd learned that adult situations were complicated, and the best you could do was wait to see how they resolved. Isabella arrived at 8:15 a.m. Daniel opened the door before she knocked. He'd heard the car. And they went to the living room, and he sat on the couch, and she positioned herself across from him, and there was none of the warmth of the Saturday dinners in the room right now. He said what he needed to say. He'd thought about it for 2 hours, and he knew what it was. Not a speech, not an argument to be won, just the truth laid out plainly the way he tried to lay out most things. Emma is not a project, he said. She's not an opportunity, and she's not a cause, and she's not something you can improve with the right investment. She is a person who is 7 years old and whose mother decided that her own life mattered more and walked away from her. I was there. I watched Emma understand over about a year what that actually meant, and I watched her figure out how to be okay with it, and I watched her build herself into the person she is, And she did that herself. She did it with a kind of strength that has nothing to do with me, and it is the most significant thing I have ever watched happen." He stopped. "And the reason I reacted the way I did today is that what you did, even if you meant well, even if it came from somewhere real, is the same pattern. An adult who decides on Emma's behalf what Emma needs without asking Emma or asking me, because they've decided their judgment is better than the process." Isabella had been looking at him throughout this. She hadn't looked away, hadn't done the thing people sometimes did when they were being told hard truths, which was to start composing their response too early and not quite hear what was actually being said. She'd heard it. "Her mother," she said. Not a question. "I'm not comparing you to her. That's not what I'm doing." "I know, but you're telling me Emma is someone who knows what it feels like to be on the receiving end of an adult's decision that she didn't get a vote in." "Yes." Isabella was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I tell you something?" "Go ahead." She looked at her hands, a thing he'd noticed her do when she was working up to something that didn't come easily. "I was 27 when the accident happened. I was at the top of what I'd been building for 6 years. Sterling Meridian was 18 months old. We'd just closed our second major funding round. I had a meeting in Geneva that I was flying to that night." A pause. "The car that hit me ran a red light. The driver was 19 years old and had been awake for 22 hours. She said it without particular emotion, with the flatness of someone who had told it enough times that the telling had worn the feeling off. After the surgeries and the rehabilitation, I went back to work in 11 weeks, which everyone told me was too soon, and which I did anyway because sitting still felt like something I couldn't survive. Like if I stopped, I would realize how much I'd lost, and I wouldn't be able to get back up." She looked up at him. "So I built systems. I built structures. I got very good at controlling every variable I could reach because there were so many variables I couldn't reach anymore. And it worked. It kept working. And at some point, working turned into being the only thing I knew how to do." Daniel didn't speak. "The co-parenting proposal," she said, and there was something almost wry in the word proposal, like she was hearing it from the outside for the first time. "I spent 8 months on it. I told myself I was being thorough, being responsible, being, I don't know, better than the people who make these decisions carelessly. But it was also—" She stopped. Her jaw was tight. "I was terrified," she said, and the word came out stripped of everything she usually put around her words. No architecture, no management. "I'm terrified of needing something I can't plan my way into." And the folder was armor. If I showed up with 40 pages, with the research and the framework and the logistics, then it wasn't just wanting. It was a sound business case for wanting. It was defensible. The room was quiet. Daniel looked at her, really looked, the way he hadn't let himself fully look yet, and saw the thing that had been underneath the proposal and the school visits and the farmer's market and all of it. Not strategy, not manipulation in the predatory sense, just a person who had been badly hurt and had built the only walls she knew how to build, and who had shown up in the rain because she'd reached the limit of what walls could do for her. "You should have just told me that," he said. "That first night." "I know." A short exhale. "I didn't know how. I still don't, really. She gestured vaguely at the space between them. "I don't have a framework for this." "Neither do I." She looked at him sharply, like she hadn't expected that. "I don't know what this is either," he said. "I've been watching you with Emma and watching you try to figure out how to be here, and I've been trying to work out what the right amount of trust is and what the right amount of caution is, and whether I'm making this harder than it has to be or not hard enough." He paused. "I don't have a framework. I'm just trying to pay attention." She held his gaze. Something in her face was open in a way it hadn't been before tonight. Not broken open, not the aftermath of falling apart, but open the way a window was open when someone had decided the air outside was probably okay. "I'm going to keep doing things wrong," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not someone who fixes quickly." "I know. And I'm going to think I'm doing the right thing, and it's going to turn out to be the right thing done in the wrong way, and I'm going to need someone to tell me before it gets too far." "That's something I can do." She almost smiled. Not quite. It didn't make it all the way. but the edge of it was there, something dry and real and not performed at all. "I'm going to call the school," she said. "First thing tomorrow." "I already know you will." He paused. "But I want you to do one other thing." "What?" "I want you to apologize to Emma." She looked at him. "Not to me," he said. "I heard your apology. I believed it. But Emma was the one standing up in an assembly, and Emma is the one who came home not knowing if she was in trouble. She deserves to hear it from you directly." He met her eyes. "And I want you to do it without an explanation, without context or reasons. Just sorry, that was wrong of me. It won't happen again." And then let her respond however she responds. Something moved through Isabella's face. He couldn't name it exactly, some mixture of recognition and difficulty. "That's hard for me," she said. "I know it is. An apology without a rationale feels like you're just wrong with nothing to point to." "Yes." "Welcome to it," he said. "Emma's been there. It's survivable." She stayed another hour, not intentionally. The conversation moved the way conversations sometimes did when the difficult part was over and the air cleared, finding smaller things to land on, more ordinary textures. He made coffee. She didn't decline it this time. They talked about the shop. She asked real questions, specific ones, not the polite interest questions people asked when they didn't care about the answer. And he found himself explaining things he hadn't talked about in a while. The satisfaction of the work, the specific way a problem with a clear mechanical answer felt different from the problems that didn't have one. "Do you like it?" she asked. "Still, after 6 years." "Most days." He wrapped his hands around the mug. "There are days where I'm mostly doing paperwork and arguing with suppliers, and I'd rather be doing the actual work. But yeah, most days." "What do you like about it specifically?" He thought about it. That a thing is either fixed or it isn't. You can tell. There's a noise, and then there isn't, or there is, and you have to keep going. He paused. "Most of the stuff in my life doesn't work that way." She looked at him and didn't say anything, which was its own kind of response. At 9:30, she moved toward the door and he walked with her, and on the porch, she turned and looked at the street, the same quiet Tuesday night street it always was, and said, without looking at him, "I was going to name her Clara, if it was a girl." A pause. "I hadn't decided on a boy's name yet." He stood next to her on the porch and looked at the street too. "Clara's a good name," he said. She nodded once. Then she called the car and they stood there without speaking until it came, which was 2 minutes, and when she got in, she did the thing she'd done before, looked back at the house, at him in the doorway. And this time there was something in it that he let himself look back at directly instead of only peripherally. The car left. He stood on the porch in the cold for a moment. Inside, upstairs, Emma slept with Gerald under her arm, and Daniel Carter stood in the October air and understood, without the comfort of a framework or a plan, that something in his life had shifted in a direction he hadn't chosen and wasn't sure he could change and was no longer sure he wanted to. Isabella apologized to Emma on a Wednesday afternoon. She'd called Daniel the morning after the porch conversation and asked when would be a good time, which he noted, asked, didn't arrange, and he'd said Wednesday after school was fine, and she'd said she'd be there at 4. She was there at 3:58, which was close enough. Emma was at the kitchen table with a math worksheet she was aggressively not doing when Daniel let Isabella in. He told Emma that Isabella was coming to talk to her, and Emma had said okay with the careful neutrality she used when she was paying close attention, and then she'd gotten out her math worksheet and stared at it the way she stared at things she didn't want to think about. Daniel brought Isabella through to the kitchen and said he'd be in the other room, and Isabella looked briefly at him, just a look, quick, asking something, and he gave her a small nod and left. He stood in the hallway and did not pretend he wasn't listening. "Hey," Isabella said. "Hey." Emma's voice was guarded in a way it usually wasn't. A pause. Chairs moving. Isabella positioning herself at the table, level with Emma rather than across from her. "I wanted to talk to you about something." "Okay?" "The assembly at your school on Tuesday, where Ms. Delgado said your name." A pause. "That happened because of something I did. I put your name forward for a program without talking to your dad first and without talking to you. And that was wrong." Silence. I should have asked, Isabella continued, and I didn't. And I'm sorry. Emma didn't respond immediately. Daniel knew the Emma pause. This one was the processing kind, not the stalling kind. Why didn't you ask? Emma said. Because I thought I knew what was good for you without checking. That's kind of what adults do, though. Sometimes. But there's a difference between adults making decisions that are their job to make, like your dad deciding what's for dinner or what time you go to bed, and adults making decisions about your life that you should have a say in. A beat. You should have had a say in this. You and your dad both. Another silence. It was kind of embarrassing, Emma said. Miss Delgado said my name, and everyone looked at me, and I didn't know what I was being looked at for. I know. That wasn't fair to you. I didn't know if I was in trouble. You weren't. You didn't do anything. That was entirely on me. The silence this time was different, softer, something settling. Are you going to do it again? Emma asked. I'm going to try very hard not to, and if I mess up again, because I probably will mess something up eventually, I'm not always great at this. I want you to tell me. You can tell me directly. You don't have to go through your dad. I can just tell you. Yes. Emma seemed to consider this arrangement. Okay, she said finally. I accept your apology. Thank you. A brief pause, and then Emma said, Do you want to see the math I'm not doing? And Isabella said, Is it geometry? Fractions. I can help with fractions. I don't want help. I want someone to agree that they're pointless. I can't agree with that, Isabella said, and there was the edge of something dry in her voice. Because fractions are genuinely useful. But I can agree that this particular worksheet looks like too much for a Wednesday afternoon. It really does, Emma said. Daniel went back to the living room and sat down and let out a breath he'd been holding since Tuesday. Something shifted after that. Not dramatically. There was no single moment he could point to and say that's when it changed, because it didn't happen that way. It happened the way most real things happened, which was gradually and then all at once, and by the time you noticed it, you were already inside it. Isabella started asking before doing. It was effortful for her. He could tell, could see it in the slight delay before she spoke, the way she'd sometimes start a sentence one way and redirect it, catching herself. She asked if she could take Emma to the bakery on Clement Street on a Saturday morning, and Daniel had said yes, and they'd gone and come back with croissants and a paper bag of things Emma had apparently convinced her to buy by describing each item in clinical detail. She asked if it was okay to send Emma a book she'd found about animal cognition, one with a whole chapter on fox intelligence, and Daniel had said yes, and Emma had read the relevant sections twice and declared them decisive. She asked about things at the shop once, carefully, whether a contact of hers who was developing a fleet management system for commercial vehicles was someone Daniel would want to talk to. She said it the right way, as information, as an offer, with a clear door out if he wasn't interested. He'd said sure, he'd take the number. The conversation with the contact had gone well enough that he'd followed up twice, and it might become something, or it might not, but the asking had mattered more than the outcome. He noticed that she was also, in some quiet and probably deliberate way, learning the texture of his life, not researching it. Researching was a thing you did at a remove with documentation, with the protective layer of information between you and the thing itself. This was different. She was present for it. The Tuesday afternoon where Emma had a meltdown about a lost library book that turned out to be under the couch, and the resolution of that took 45 minutes and involved crying and raised voices and eventually the undignified spectacle of Daniel lying flat on the kitchen floor with a flashlight. Isabella had stayed through all of it, not intervening, not offering the kind of competent managerial assistance that would have been her instinct, just sitting there while it happened, and when it was over and Emma was hiccuping quietly on the couch with the recovered book in her lap, Isabella had said, "That looked exhausting," and Emma had said, "It was," and they'd had a brief and genuine moment of commiseration that Daniel had watched from the kitchen doorway while pretending to look for something in the refrigerator. She stayed for dinner that night. She hadn't planned to. He hadn't planned to invite her. It just happened, the way things were starting to just happen, and he wasn't fighting it as hard as he probably should have been. Sal noticed the change before Daniel admitted to it. You're distracted, Sal said one Thursday morning, looking at an invoice Daniel had processed with the wrong date. I'm fine. You've been fine for about 3 weeks in a way that looks different from regular fine. Daniel corrected the invoice. It's a number. It's the third number this week. The week's not done. Sal was quiet for a moment, doing the thing where he decided whether to say the thing. He said the thing. This is about the woman. Her name is Isabella. I know her name. I'm asking about the situation. Daniel put down the invoice. She's been around, getting to know Emma. It's going okay. Just okay? It's going well. She's trying, and she makes mistakes, but she owns them, and she adjusts. He paused. She's not who I thought she was when she showed up in the rain. Who did you think she was? Someone who wanted something and was willing to do whatever it took to get it. And now? He thought about the apology to Emma, the asking instead of deciding. Clara, a name she'd told him on a porch in October, quietly and without fanfare, a piece of herself she hadn't needed to offer. Now I think she's someone who built a lot of walls and is figuring out how to live without them. Sal made the sound he made when he wasn't going to argue with something. You like her. I said that before. Now I believe you. He went back to his work. Just don't make Emma a buffer. What do you mean? Sal glanced back at him. I mean, don't let Emma's relationship with her stand in for you figuring out what your relationship with her is. 2 different things. He pointed the wrench at the invoice pile. Fix those numbers. Pati. The clarity Sal had pushed toward came sooner than Daniel expected, in a form he didn't anticipate. It was a Friday evening in late November, the kind of cold that had moved past brisk and into serious, and they were all 3 at the house. Emma on her second hot chocolate of the evening in direct violation of the agreed-upon 1 hot chocolate rule, Daniel doing end-of-week paperwork at the kitchen table, Isabella on the couch with her laptop working on something. She'd started bringing her laptop. He'd started making coffee when she was coming. Neither of them had commented on either of these facts. The situation felt domestic in a way that Daniel had been not quite naming for weeks, not because it was uncomfortable, but because naming it felt like a decision that would change the weight of it. Emma came to the kitchen with her empty mug and said, in the tone of someone announcing a simple and indisputable fact, Isabella should just live here. Daniel looked up from the papers. She's here all the time anyway, Emma continued, rinsing the mug with approximately 1/3 of the care required to actually clean it. And she could have the 3rd bedroom. I already thought about it. You already thought about it. The bedroom's just storage right now. You keep saying you're going to clean it out. She put the mug in the drying rack. 2 birds. Emma. I'm just saying. Go tell Isabella you finished your hot chocolate so she can verify you only had 1. Emma's face did the thing. That's very specific. Because I know you. She went back to the living room. Daniel heard the murmur of her voice, then Isabella's. He couldn't make out words. Then Emma's laugh, the real one, the all-the-way one. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the papers in front of him and didn't see them at all. He went to the doorway. Emma had climbed back onto the couch beside Isabella and was explaining something with her hands. The explaining with hands was new, a recent development. She'd started doing it in the past month and he didn't know where she'd picked it up. Isabella was watching her with the specific quality of attention she gave Emma, focused, almost formal, like Emma was saying something worth taking seriously. And she hadn't noticed Daniel in the doorway yet. He watched them for a moment. Then Isabella glanced up and saw him, and something passed between them, fast, adult, the kind of exchange that happened in the space above a child's head. And he said, Emma, it's 8:30. Emma looked at the time with theatrical shock. Already? Bed, go. I wasn't tired. You also had 2 hot chocolates. Betrayal crossed Emma's face as she looked from Daniel to Isabella. You told him. I didn't say a word, Isabella said, and she wasn't quite smiling, but she was close. The mug, Daniel said. You rinsed it, but you didn't dry it. There was still chocolate on the rim. Emma looked at the kitchen doorway as though the mug had personally let her down. Then she slid off the couch and kissed the top of Isabella's head the way she sometimes kissed the top of Daniel's, quick, perfunctory, habitual, and went upstairs. Isabella sat very still for a second after. She was looking at the stairs, her expression unreadable, but in the specific way that meant it was being kept unreadable. Her hand had gone to the place Emma's kiss had landed briefly, then dropped. Daniel came into the room and sat on the couch, where Emma had been. "She does that," he said, "the forehead thing. She does it to me every night." "I noticed." "Does it?" "Don't ask me if it bothers me," Isabella said. Her voice was tight in a new way, a way he hadn't heard before. Not controlled tight, but something else. "It doesn't bother me. It's not a problem. I just wasn't prepared for it." He looked at her profile. The lamp on the side table caught the line of her jaw, the way she was holding herself carefully together. "Isabella, I'm fine." "You're not, which is fine. You don't have to be." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, the control was partially back, but not fully. "I'm 30 years old," she said. "I have built something from nothing 3 times over in 2 different industries. I have sat in rooms with people who thought less of me because of the chair, and I have outworked and outthought and outlasted every single one of them." A pause. "And a 7-year-old kissed the top of my head like it was the most normal thing in the world, and I almost—" She stopped. "Almost what?" "Almost fell apart in your living room." She said it with a flat precision that was its own form of honesty, which would have been deeply embarrassing. "I've seen you not fall apart," he said. "It's not that impressive." She turned and looked at him. "I mean, you're very good at it," he said. "Technically impressive, but I'm not sure it's actually helping you." She kept looking at him. "Are you telling me to cry on your couch?" "I'm telling you that this is a living room, not a boardroom, and there's nobody here who's going to use it against you." He paused. "Emma's asleep. I'm not your board of directors. You can just—" He searched for the word. "Be a person." "I'm always a person." "You're always performing the most competent version of a person, which is different." She held his gaze for a long moment, and he watched something in her face go through several small adjustments, the machinery of self-management running, then slowing, then going mostly quiet. "The accident changed everything," she said. "Not the clinical version this time, not the way she'd told it before. I mean, I know I told you about it, the facts of it, but I don't usually—" She looked at her hands. "Before the accident, I was annoying in a very specific way, very confident, very sure that I knew how things were going to go, that I had the ability to make them go the right way through effort and intelligence. That version of me was genuinely insufferable, I think, looking back. And after, she exhaled slowly. After, the insufferable confidence was still there, but now it was built on something terrifying underneath. Because I had been wrong. I had been completely, catastrophically wrong that I was in control of anything. The car came out of nowhere, and in 2 seconds, everything I'd built my identity on—" She paused. "Gone. And so I built the new version on the same frame, but with better armor. More systems, more planning, more everything." She paused again. "The co-parenting proposal, the 40 pages. It was, I wanted so badly to not be the woman in the car again. The one who thought she was fine and wasn't." Daniel was quiet. "A child changes everything," she said. "That's what scared me. Not the love. I knew I'd love a child. I've known that for years. But a child is the one thing you can't engineer, can't plan into safety, can't protect from everything by building the right structure." Her voice was steady now, but only just. "And I thought if I had the right partner, someone who already knew how to do it, who had already proven he could—" "Isabella." He said it gently. "You came to my door in the rain. I know. You didn't need the 40 pages, you just needed to come to the door." She looked at him then, really looked, and he had the particular sense of seeing someone without any of the architecture up, no folder, no proposal, no corporate precision, just a woman who had been terrified for 3 years and had finally gotten tired of the armor. He didn't plan what happened next. He wasn't a person who planned those things, and even if he had been, he wouldn't have planned it for a Friday night in late November on his couch, while his daughter slept upstairs. He just reached over and put his hand over hers on the cushion between them. That was all. Not a declaration, not a transition, just a hand on a hand, the simplest possible signal that she was not, in this room, alone. She looked down at it. She didn't move her hand. After a while, she said very quietly, "This is not what I put in the proposal." "No, he said. "It's better," she said. He didn't say anything, neither did she. The house held its ordinary nighttime sounds around them. The heat through the vents, a car passing outside, the distant small sound of a 7-year-old redistributing herself in her sleep, and it was enough. She left at 10, as she usually did. He walked her to the door, as he usually did. On the porch she turned, as she had done before, but this time it was different. She looked at him without the distance she usually kept, and he looked back at her, and the night between them was cold and clear. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Okay. What are we doing?" She took a breath. "I don't have a framework for it." "Neither do I. I asked first." The corner of her mouth moved, nearly a smile, the real kind, the private kind he'd only seen a few times. "I think," she said carefully, "that I don't want to leave every night. And I think that's the most honest thing I've said to you since I showed up in the rain." He held her gaze in the cold porch light. "That's honest enough," he said. She nodded once, and the car was already at the curb, and she went to it. But this time, when she looked back from the door of the car, she held his gaze the full way. Not peripheral, not managed, just looked at him. And he held it back. And that was a thing that hadn't happened before, and both of them knew it. The car pulled away. He stood on the porch in the cold for a while. He wasn't thinking about the proposal or the rain or the school assembly or any of it. He was thinking about what Sal had said. Don't make Emma a buffer. And he understood now that he'd been using the question of Emma, the thing about Emma, as a reason to stay at a careful distance from his own answer. Emma had given hers weeks ago. He'd watched her give it quietly and without ceremony, in the way she did most things that mattered to her, and he'd stood behind it and called it caution. He went inside. He locked the door. He checked on Emma. Asleep, Gerald tucked close, the fox's small stitched face catching the nightlight. He stood in the doorway and did the usual check, and this time the quiet at the end of it felt different. Fuller, somehow. Like the house had a different weight to it than it had a month ago or 2 months ago, before a rainstorm and a woman who showed up with a folder and an open, terrified need she'd wrapped in 40 pages of logistics. He went to bed. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he fell asleep without reviewing everything that still needed to be figured out. Some things, it turned out, didn't need to be figured out first. December came in without ceremony. The city got its first real cold snap the second week of the month, the kind that turned breath visible and made the walk from the car to the front door feel like something that required commitment. Daniel had hauled the box of winter things down from the closet shelf. Emma's coat that still fit, barely, her gloves with the one missing, the scarf he never wore but kept anyway. And the house smelled for a few days like the cedar blocks he used to keep the moths out, which Emma said smelled like a grandparent's house, which made Daniel ask what she knew about grandparents' houses, which led to a 20-minute conversation about his own mother that he hadn't expected but didn't mind. Isabella had been to the house 11 times in November. He knew the number because he wasn't counting, and then one day he was, and the number was 11, and he sat with that for a while without drawing any particular conclusion from it, except that 11 was a lot, and none of them had felt like too many. Things between them had moved with the specific, careful momentum of people who had both been burned before and had privately agreed, without saying so out loud, that there was value in not rushing. The hand on the couch had been a beginning. There had been other small beginnings since, a conversation in the kitchen that ran until midnight and covered, in no particular order, his brother in Portland, her mother's second marriage, the accident again, but differently this time, more of the inside of it, and a bottle of wine that emptied itself over the course of 3 hours without either of them noticing until it was gone. An afternoon where Emma had a nightmare nap and woke up crying, and Daniel had been in the middle of something in the garage, and Isabella had gotten there first and had sat with Emma on the couch and talked her through it in a low, steady voice that Daniel had heard through the door and had not interrupted because it was working. And Emma had come out 20 minutes later with pink eyes and a much improved outlook and had declared that Isabella had fixed it, as though Isabella were an appliance that had been correctly applied. He'd kissed her for the first time on a Thursday evening in late November. Not dramatically. They'd been standing in the kitchen, she was getting her coat, they'd been in the middle of a sentence about something neither of them remembered afterward. And he'd looked at her and she'd looked at him, and it had just happened. The way the dinner invitation had happened, the way all the real things had happened, without preamble or design. It lasted about 4 seconds, and then they'd both stood there for a moment, and she'd said, "That took long enough." And he'd laughed, actually laughed, surprised by it, and she'd smiled the real smile, the private one, and gone home. He'd called Sal the next morning and said simply, "Something happened." Sal had said, "I know, you sound different. I haven't told you what it is yet." "I know what it is." A pause. "I told you to be careful." "You did." "You didn't listen." "No." Another pause. Longer. "Is she good to Emma?" "Yes." "Is she good to you?" He thought about 4 seconds in a kitchen, about the real smile, about a woman who had shown up in the rain with 40 pages of armor and had, over the course of 3 months, slowly let someone else carry some of the weight. "Yeah," he said. "She is." "Then be careful in a different way," Sal said, and hung up. The thing about choosing people, really choosing them, not the version of them you hoped they'd become, or the version that fit the plan you'd had before they arrived, was that it required you to keep choosing them on the days when it was hard. Daniel understood this in a way he hadn't when he was younger. He'd learned it the difficult way, through a marriage that had started full of intention and had unraveled not through any single failure, but through the slow accumulation of two people choosing, on too many small days, not to do the harder thing. He wasn't bitter about it, but he'd moved well past bitter, but he carried it, the knowledge of it, in the particular way you carried things that had taught you something essential about yourself. What he'd learned was that love, if that was the word, wasn't primarily a feeling, it was a practice. It was deciding day after day to show up for someone in the specific ways they needed to be shown up for, even when you were tired, even when it was inconvenient, even when part of you wanted to retreat to the simpler life you'd had before you let them in. The feeling was real, but the feeling was also unreliable. The practice was what lasted. He was thinking about this on a Saturday morning in December, when Emma came downstairs and found Isabella already in the kitchen. This had happened before. Isabella arriving early, Daniel still upstairs. Emma navigating the kitchen with an adult who was not her father. But this time was different because Emma came downstairs and saw Isabella making coffee, actually making coffee, having clearly found the machine in the grounds and sorted it out without being shown, and Emma stood in the doorway and watched her and said, "You know where the coffee is?" Isabella looked up. "Your dad showed me last week." Emma was in her socks, both intact this time, no holes, and her hair was still the particular disaster of mourning, and she looked at Isabella with the appraising sideways look she used when she was triangulating something. "Do you know where the cereal is?" "Cabinet above the microwave." "Do you know which one I like?" "The one with the cartoon bird on it." Emma looked at her for one more moment, completing whatever calculation she'd been running. Then she went to the cabinet and got the cereal, and came to the island and sat down and said, while pouring, "You should just live here." "You've said that before." "I mean it more now." She poured milk with the careful excess of someone who had not been told how much was appropriate. "Dad's happier." Isabella set down the coffee spoon. "Is he?" "Yeah." Emma ate a bite of cereal, thinking about it. "He used to do this thing where he'd sit at the kitchen table after I went to bed and just..." She moved her hand in a way that wasn't quite anything. "Just sit, like he was waiting for something to be done. He doesn't do that as much." Isabella was quiet in the way she went quiet when something had actually reached her. "He's still kind of stressed about stuff," Emma continued, "like normal stuff. The shop and the paperwork and the parts thing he was mad about, but it's a different stressed. The kind where something's going on, not the kind where nothing is." She ate another bite. "It's hard to explain." "I think I understand," Isabella said. "Do you like him?" Emma asked, completely direct, fork hovering. Isabella looked at her. "Yes." Like? "Emma, I'm asking because I want to know. That's what asking is for." Isabella picked up the coffee mug, and she was almost smiling, the real one, the private one that Daniel had started to think of as the one that counted. Yes, she said. Like. Emma nodded, satisfied, and went back to her cereal. Okay, I think you should stay. Where's all this coming from? Sophie's parents got divorced in October, Emma said matter-of-factly. Sophie said she could feel it coming for a long time before it happened, because they stopped being around each other even when they were in the same room. She looked up. You and my dad are around each other, even when you're doing different things. Isabella set the mug down. She didn't say anything for a long moment, and Emma didn't require her to. They sat in the kitchen in the winter morning quiet, and when Daniel came downstairs 10 minutes later, still pulling on a sweater, he found them both at the island. Emma at the cereal, Isabella at the coffee, the Saturday paper that he still got in physical form spread between them. Emma reading the comics with focused attention, and Isabella reading the front section with a pencil behind her ear that he was fairly sure was his. He stood in the doorway and watched them not notice him for about 30 seconds. Then Emma said without looking up, "There's coffee." And Isabella said without looking up, "Comics are already claimed." And Daniel went to the cabinet above the microwave. Shim. The difficult conversation came in the second week of December, the way difficult conversations had a way of coming. Not announced, not scheduled, arriving because the moment had built to the point where it couldn't be avoided anymore. They were at the kitchen table after Emma was in bed, a thing that had become their time. The hour after 8:30, when the house was quiet, and they could say the things that didn't get said with a 7-year-old in the room. He'd made tea because the wine was gone, and neither of them had thought to get more, and they were sitting across from each other with the comfortable disorganization of two people who had stopped performing tidiness for each other. "I need to tell you something," Isabella said. He looked up. Her face had the particular quality it had when she was doing the thing she'd been working on, saying the real thing without the architecture around it. "My board has been asking me about the company's direction," she said. "There are two of them who think I've been distracted this quarter. One of them, Marcus Hale, he's been on the board since the beginning. He asked me last week whether I was still committed to the company at the level they'd invested in." "What did you tell him?" "I told him yes. Because I am, but..." She wrapped her hands around the tea mug. "It's made me think about something I've been not thinking about, which is that Sterling Meridian is a very demanding thing, and this," she gestured between them, "is also a very demanding thing, and I haven't actually figured out how those two fit together." He looked at her steadily. "Are you telling me this is too much?" "No." Firm, immediate. "I'm telling you that I have a habit of discovering problems after they've become crises because I don't look at them while they're small, and I'm trying to look at this one while it's small." She met his eyes. "I don't want to fail at this because I was overextended and didn't say so." "Okay," he said. "So, say so." "I might need to. There are going to be weeks where the company needs all of me. Weeks where I can't be here, where I'm traveling or I'm in back-to-back meetings, and I'm not good for anything that requires emotional availability." She said it with the particular honesty of someone who knew themselves well enough to be accurate about their limitations. "I've been bad at that before. The people who've tried to be close to me before..." She stopped. "They didn't last. Not because they didn't care. Because I disappeared into work when it was hard and I didn't communicate when I was doing it. I just went. You're communicating now. I'm trying to." A pause. "I'm telling you in advance that I'm not good at this part. I know what the problem is. I don't know that I'm fixed." He thought about what he'd said to her months ago, the question he'd asked on the phone. "Are you capable of doing this differently?" And she'd said, "I think it might be a pattern." And he'd said, "Okay," because the honesty had been worth more than the answer he'd wanted. "I'm a mechanic," he said. She blinked. "I know. I mean, a machine doesn't have to be fixed to be worth working on. It has to be worth working on." He paused. "I'm not looking for someone who's already figured it out. I don't have it figured out either. I have a kid and a shop, and I haven't been in a real relationship in 4 years. And I've been using Emma as an excuse to not try at things for longer than I'd like to admit." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking you to be finished. I'm asking you to be in this." She looked at him for a long time. I'm in this, she said. Then we figure the rest out. That's a very simple framework for something complicated. Yeah, well, he picked up his mug. I don't have a 40-page document for everything. She made the sound she made when she was trying not to laugh and was failing, a controlled exhale through her nose. And he smiled at his tea, and the kitchen was warm and the house was quiet, and Emma was asleep upstairs with Gerald on the nightstand, and some things, he thought, did not require frameworks. They just required the willingness to stay in the room when it got hard. Christmas arrived. Emma had opinions about Christmas in the same way she had opinions about everything. Specific, thoroughly researched, delivered with the authority of someone who had been thinking about this longer than you had. She wanted a real tree, not the fake one that was in the garage from 2 years ago. She wanted to make cookies, the complicated kind with the frosting that came in 3 colors. She wanted to watch exactly 2 movies, which she named, and she wanted to watch them in order. And she was aware that both requests were negotiable individually, but not as a set. Daniel got the real tree. He drove Emma to the lot on Saturday morning, and they walked through it for 40 minutes while Emma applied her selection criteria. Height, fullness, the specific green she was looking for, whether the branches were strong enough to hold the ornaments she had in mind. She settled on one that was, Daniel estimated, slightly larger than he'd wanted and perfect in every other way. And they'd wrestled it into the back of the truck and driven home with pine needles on both of them. Isabella came that afternoon. She arrived as they were getting the stand sorted out, which was the unglamorous part of tree acquisition, the part involving lying on the floor, arguments about whether the trunk was actually straight, and a wing nut that stripped on the first try. Emma directed from above with the authority of a project manager, and Daniel did the physical work, and Isabella, to her credit, did not try to manage it. She sat on the couch and watched and offered only opinions when asked, which happened twice, and both times she gave them without hedging. When the tree was up, not perfectly straight, about 2 degrees to the left, which Emma had declared acceptable, Emma looked at it for a long moment with the critical eye of someone taking a final inventory. It needs lights first, she announced, then ornaments, then the star, in that order. That is in fact the correct order, Isabella said. Emma pointed at her. Exactly. They did the lights, which took longer than it should have because a section of the strand was out, and they had to find the bulb. This was the kind of problem that Daniel actually found satisfying, methodical, a clear answer waiting at the end of it. And Emma got bored halfway through and started putting ornaments on anyway, in the wrong order, and then corrected herself, and Isabella untangled the second strand without being asked and handed sections to Emma without ceremony, the two of them working around each other in a way that had stopped looking new. By the time the star went up, Emma standing on the arm of the couch, Daniel holding the base because the couch arm was not structurally ideal for this purpose, Isabella watching with her hands wrapped around a mug of something warm. The light through the window had gone thin and gray, and the tree lights were the best thing in the room. Emma stood on the couch arm and looked at what they'd done. It's good, she said. She had high standards. This was high praise. She looked at Daniel, then at Isabella, then back at the tree. This is a good day, she said, in the matter-of-fact way she said things that mattered to her. Daniel looked at his daughter standing on the arm of the couch in her holey socks. New pair, new hole, he didn't know how she did it, and felt the specific and enormous weight of what ordinary happiness actually cost. How long it had taken. How many not good days had preceded this one. How many mornings he'd made cereal for a quiet kid who was carrying something she couldn't name, and how many nights he'd sat at the kitchen table doing the thing Emma had described, just sitting, waiting for something to be done. He looked at Isabella. She was looking at the tree, the lights reflected in her eyes, and she had the expression she got sometimes. He'd learned to read it now, the one where she was fully present in a moment and not trying to record it or analyze it or plan from it, just sitting inside it. It was the hardest thing for her, being fully present without an agenda, and she was getting better at it. Not fixed, better. She felt him looking and turned, and they held the look for a moment. And in it was everything that hadn't needed to be said out loud because they'd been saying it in smaller ways for months. In late kitchens and early mornings, in the careful asking before doing, in the hand on the couch, and the real smile and the 4 seconds that had eventually turned into longer. Good day, he agreed. The week between Christmas and New Year's was the week Daniel had always liked best. The shop was closed. Emma was on school holiday and occupied herself with books and Gerald and an ambitious craft project that had taken over the dining room table by the second day. The city had the particular quality it had in that in-between week, quieter, unhurried, as though it had collectively agreed to suspend the usual pace. Isabella came every day that week. Not all day. She had work, even during the holidays, because Sterling Meridian had a schedule that didn't observe sentiment. But she came in the afternoons and she stayed for dinner, and some nights she stayed until Emma was in bed, and then past that, until the late kitchen conversation hour that had become theirs. One night she fell asleep on the couch, and he got a blanket from the closet and left her there, and in the morning, Emma had found her and had, apparently, climbed up next to her without waking her, because when Daniel came downstairs at 6:45, they were both there. Emma curled into Isabella's side with the unself-conscious claiming of territory that only sleeping children practiced, and Isabella was beginning to wake up and looked, for the first few seconds before the day started, entirely unguarded. He made coffee and did not say anything about it, which was a mercy she accepted without comment. On the 28th, she was sitting at the kitchen table while Daniel dealt with an email situation at the shop, a supplier problem that had escalated over the holiday and was being resolved through a chain of messages with an increasingly frustrated tone. And Emma came in from the dining room with a piece of the craft project in her hand. "Isabella," she said. What's your middle name?" Isabella looked up from her laptop. "Rose? Why?" Emma looked at the thing in her hand. It was a small handmade tag, the kind that went on a gift, decorated with what appeared to be a fox, and wrote something on it. "Just checking," she said, and went back to the dining room. Daniel looked at Isabella. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything. On New Year's Eve, Emma was allowed to stay up until 10, which she declared insufficient, but accepted as a compromise better than nothing. They watched one of the two movies she'd designated, ate the cookies they'd made 2 days earlier, the complicated ones, 3 colors of frosting, and Emma fell asleep on the couch at 9:45, about which she would later claim complete awareness. Daniel carried her to bed. Isabella waited in the living room, and when he came back down, she was sitting on the couch with the lights from the Christmas tree still on, the movie credits rolling on the silent television, the small house held in the particular warmth of a winter night with good insulation and people who wanted to be there. He sat next to her. They were quiet for a while in the way they were sometimes quiet, the way that had stopped needing to be filled. "Next year," she said. "What about it?" "I want to be here. Not just—" She paused, choosing. "Not just visiting. I want to be in this, properly." She looked at him. "I know what I said about the board, about the work, and I meant it. There are going to be hard weeks. I'm not promising a version of this that's easier than what it will actually be. But I want it, all of it. Emma's math homework and the tree and the late nights and the parts problems you complain about, and—" She stopped. "I want to stop leaving at 10 o'clock. He looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes." She exhaled. Not dramatically, but he felt it, the small release of something held. She leaned her head against his shoulder, which was not a thing she did casually. She was not, by nature, a person who leaned on things. And he put his arm around her and they sat like that in the quiet living room while the old year ticked down outside. This was not what she'd put in the folder. The folder had been logistics, frameworks, custody arrangements, co-parenting calendars. It had been the shape of a family drawn in advance, the way you might draw the floor plan of a house you intended to build. What they had instead was something that had assembled itself from the material of actual days, arguments and apologies and dinners that ran late, and a kid who did her own taxonomy of coins, and a man who fell asleep thinking about what still needed figuring out, and a woman who had arrived in the rain with her armor on, and had, slowly, in increments she couldn't always track, set it down. Daniel had thought, for a long time, that what Emma needed most was protection from the unpredictability of things, from adults who came and went, from the specific damage of being loved insufficiently or inconsistently. He hadn't been wrong, exactly, but he'd understood it too narrowly. What Emma needed was not the absence of change. It was the presence of people who stayed. Not because the conditions were right, not because the plan was holding, but because they decided to. Because staying was a thing you did with intention, and then again the next day and the day after that, until the deciding accumulated into something that didn't need to be decided anymore because it just was. Isabella had made that choice. She hadn't made it cleanly. She'd made it badly at first, then better, then badly again in a smaller way, then better again. The way real choosing went, the way it never went in the version people told afterward, where the arc was clear and the growth was linear and nobody dropped anything or had to go back for it. He'd made it too, imperfectly. With caution that sometimes crossed into distance, with expectations built from the damage of things that had failed before, with a tendency to protect himself by protecting Emma, letting one stand in for the other so he didn't have to look at either directly. He was still doing that sometimes. He was going to keep doing it in smaller and smaller increments, probably. The point wasn't to stop failing. The point was to keep showing up after. On the 2nd of January, Emma gave Isabella the gift tag. She'd finished the craft project on New Year's Day. It turned out to be a sort of small, handmade book, the pages cut and folded from construction paper, decorated with drawings in Emma's precise, slightly too large style. It was about a fox. The fox in the book was named Gerald, and the story was about Gerald finding a house to live in, which he did by the last page, and the last page was a drawing of the house with 3 figures in front of it, one tall, one shorter, one in a wheelchair, and Gerald on the windowsill inside. The tag attached to it read, "For Isabella Rose. This is for you because you live here now. Love, Emma Carter." Emma had apparently written Carter after her own name and had left a blank after Isabella, which she filled in with Isabella's last name, Sterling, so the tag read, "For Isabella Rose Sterling. This is for you because you live here now. Love, Emma Carter." Isabella read it twice. Then she held it in her hands for a moment and said nothing, and Emma watched her with the waiting patience of someone who had already done the hard work and was now content to let the other person catch up. "Thank you," Isabella said, and her voice was not entirely steady. "Gerald thinks you should have your own key," Emma said. "He told me." Daniel, leaning in the doorway, said, "Gerald is a fox." "He has opinions," Emma said. Isabella looked up and found Daniel in the doorway, and across the living room and the Christmas tree that still had 2 more days before he was taking it down, and the scattered aftermath of Emma's project on the coffee table, they looked at each other. He pushed off the doorframe. "I'll make copies," he said. She moved the rest of her things in gradually, the way she did most things. Not all at once, not in a single declared moment, but piece by piece over the course of February, until the presents had accumulated into permanence and nobody had quite noticed the transition because it had been happening for months already. The 3rd bedroom got cleared out. He'd been right that it was mostly storage, and it became her office. Her desk brought from the apartment, the specific monitor setup she needed for work, a small bookshelf that she filled methodically with books Daniel hadn't read, and which Emma immediately started reading out of order. The room had a window that looked out over the backyard, and in the mornings he'd sometimes pass it and see her in there before either of them had acknowledged the day, already working, already inside whatever problem Sterling Meridian had handed her before breakfast. He left coffee on the desk those mornings. She'd stopped pretending she didn't like that. There were difficult things, because there always were. She and Emma had a real fight in March. The first actual one, not just friction but genuine disagreement, Emma wanting something she wasn't allowed, and Isabella holding the line in a way that was right but delivered imperfectly. And Emma had said something mean in the way kids said mean things when they were out of arguments, and Isabella had gotten quiet in the way she got quiet when something had actually gotten through. Daniel had navigated it badly in the middle and better at the end, and by the next morning Emma had apologized, formally, which Daniel recognized as Emma's version of sincere, and Isabella had said she could have done it better too. And Emma had said, "You could have," which made Isabella laugh despite herself. There were the work weeks Isabella had warned him about, the stretches where she left early and came home late, and had the tight, preoccupied look of someone running multiple things at once, and running all of them at capacity. He'd learned not to take those weeks personally. She'd learned to surface for dinner when she could, even for 30 minutes, even tired, because 30 minutes at a dinner table was different from nothing, and she knew that now in a way she hadn't before. She couldn't have a child, it turned out. The accident had made that unlikely in ways she'd learned over 2 years of medical consultation and had integrated into herself with the flat, factual resilience she applied to things she couldn't change. She told him about it on a Tuesday night in April, not as a loss exactly, but as a fact she wanted him to have, clearly and without ceremony. He'd held her hand and said he was sorry, and she'd said she'd been sorry too, for a while, and then she'd arrived at something on the other side of it. Emma, she said. Emma was on the other side of it. She was not Emma's mother. She was not trying to be. Emma had a mother somewhere, a fact Emma understood and had reached her own settlements with in the private interior way she reached settlements with things. What Isabella was to Emma was something they'd never needed to name, because Emma had named it herself on a craft project tag in January. You live here now. That was the whole of it. That was enough. The folder, the one Isabella had put together over 8 months, the 40 pages. Daniel found it once in the third bedroom when he was looking for a charger, tucked in the back of a desk drawer. He didn't say anything about it. He put the charger back where it had been. He wasn't sure if she kept it out of nostalgia or as a reminder of a self she was still in the process of leaving behind. Maybe both. The armor we build to survive things doesn't always feel like something we can simply set down and walk away from. Sometimes we carry it with us until the day we look at it and realize we haven't needed it in so long that we can't quite remember what it was for. That was okay. You didn't have to be fixed. You just had to keep choosing. There was a night in late spring, May, the windows open, the street smelling like the end of something and the beginning of something else, when Daniel sat on the porch after Emma was in bed and Isabella was inside, and he thought about the rainstorm in October, the woman at the door, the folder, the entirely reasonable, correctly calibrated instinct that this was not something he wanted in his life. He'd been right about a lot of it. She had been that person, the one who controlled and planned and researched her way around the vulnerability of actually wanting something. She'd done exactly what he'd warned her not to do, more than once. She'd been wrong in ways that were specific and costly, and she'd owned every one of them. And he had not been uncomplicated. He'd been afraid in his own way, with his own armor, and he'd made Emma the reason not to risk things that were actually about himself. He'd been cautious in a way that looked like wisdom, and was partly wisdom, and partly a man who'd been left once and was not enthusiastic about the experience repeating. They'd both shown up with damage. That was the thing no one told you about finding your people. Not that it was easy, not that the right ones arrived without complications, but that sometimes the right ones arrived with enough damage of their own that there was a kind of honesty in it. You could see each other clearly because you were both standing in similar light. Isabella came to the door behind him. She leaned in the frame. Emma left a sock on the bathroom floor, she said. Just one? Just one? She does that. The other one turns up eventually. Isabella came out and sat beside him on the porch step, and the spring night was warm and the street was quiet, and the light from inside the house fell out around them. Are you happy? He asked. He wasn't sure where the question came from. It had just arrived. She thought about it in the real way, not the automatic yes of someone answering the polite version. Yes, she said. I think so. It's different from how I thought it would feel. How did you think it would feel? More resolved, more, she searched for the word, more completed, like a thing you finished. And? It doesn't feel finished. It feels like something happening. She paused. I think I used to want the feeling of completion. The goal reached, the project done. I think I wanted a family the way I wanted a company. Achieved, built, finished. A pause. This isn't that. No, he said. It's better, she said. Harder, but better. He thought about the mechanics version of it. The work was never done. The maintenance was ongoing. The machine needed attention every day, or it stopped running right. Most people thought that was a burden. Daniel had always thought it was the point. You kept your hands in it. You stayed. I'm going to ask you something, he said. She looked at him. He wasn't a man who did grand gestures. He didn't have a plan for this, didn't have a ring in a pocket, didn't have a speech that he'd been writing. What he had was a porch and a spring night, and a woman who had arrived in a rainstorm with 40 pages of reasons she was afraid to want things, and who had become, through the unremarkable and irreplaceable accumulation of ordinary days, someone he could not imagine the house without. "Stay," he said. She knew what he meant. Not the practical meaning. She already lived here, that had been settled by degrees months ago. He meant the other thing, the larger, ongoing thing. Stay for the hard weeks and the arguments and the craft projects and the kitchen mornings and the thing Emma had described, being around each other even when they were in the same room doing different things. Stay for the years of it, not because the plan required it, but because it was what you chose. She held his gaze. "I already am," she said. He nodded. That was enough. It was, he thought, exactly enough. Not the resolution of something, but the continuation of it. Two people on a porch in May committing to the very unglamorous, very essential work of staying present for whatever came next. Inside the house, Emma slept with Gerald on the nightstand, a child who had built herself out of difficult material and was, by most measures that mattered, doing wonderfully. Outside, the spring street was quiet. The neighborhood was ordinary and decent and theirs. Here is what is true about families. They are not made by blood or plans or even love. Exactly, though love is in there. They are made by presence, by the 10:30 nights you don't turn away from, by the apologies given without the explanation attached, by the coffee left on the desk before the day starts, by the hand on the couch, by the choice, every day, to be the person who stayed. Not because staying is always easy, because it matters. Because the people in that house, all three of them, had learned something about what it cost to lose a person and had arrived, through entirely different paths and entirely different damage, at the same understanding that what you built together was worth more than what you could have controlled alone. Gerald the fox sat on the nightstand. The tree was long gone, stored in the garage now, the real kind. Emma's coin game had acquired new rules that neither adult fully understood, but both agreed to follow. The house on the east side of Millfield was lit from the inside, and that was enough. That was the whole of it.